White male flight attendant arrogantly cuts black deaf girl's dreadlocks. Her father's call shuts down the airline. When prejudice meets power, the world learns that sometimes the girl who cannot hear is the one who makes everyone listen. The scissors gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of Terminal 4, their chrome surface reflecting the cruel smile spreading across Ethan Shaw's face. 14-year-old Nia Coleman's hands moved frantically in the air, signing stop over and over, but her silent pleas fell on deaf ears, literally and figuratively. The blade bit through the first lock, 5 years of growth and heritage falling to the sterile airport floor like a severed lifeline. Hey beautiful souls! Before we dive deeper into Nia's story, I want to say hello to everyone watching. Where are you tuning in from today? I hope you're having an incredible day, and I'm so grateful you're here with me. If you haven't subscribed yet, please hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one need to reach every corner of the world, and your support makes that possible. Nia's world had been silent for 14 years, but she'd never felt more voiceless than in this moment. Her hands trembled as she watched her beautiful dreadlocks, her silent crown, as her grandmother called them, scatter across the cold tile. Each severed strand carried memories, her grandmother's fingers gently twisting new growth, her mother's proud smile on picture day, her father's kiss on her forehead before every important moment. Now they lay discarded like trash, while passengers pulled out phones to record her humiliation. The business class ticket in her pocket, her father's surprise gift for making honor roll despite every obstacle the world threw at a deaf black girl, felt like mockery now. She was supposed to feel special today, supposed to feel like she belonged in spaces that usually looked right through her. Instead, she sat frozen in a chair while a white flight attendant with hate in his eyes systematically destroyed the only crown she'd ever worn with pride. Unprofessional, Ethan Shaw had written on his notepad, holding it up for her to read before producing the scissors from his pocket with theatrical flourish. As if her natural hair, her heritage, her identity, her grandmother's legacy, was somehow a threat to airline safety. As if the girl who'd fought through 7 surgeries, countless therapy sessions, and years of being the only deaf student in every classroom didn't deserve to exist exactly as God made her. Nia's chest heaved with silent sobs as more locks fell. The weight of generations of strength that her grandmother had woven into each strand was being erased by a man who probably couldn't even spell discrimination, let alone understand the violence he was committing. Her fingers moved to her phone with shaking urgency. She needed her grandmother, needed someone who would understand that this wasn't just about hair. This was about dignity. This was about belonging. This was about a 14-year-old girl who'd overcome every obstacle the world placed in front of her, only to be brought to her knees by institutional racism wielding a pair of airport scissors. But what Ethan Shaw didn't know, what none of them knew as they stood watching or recording, was that Nia Coleman wasn't just any deaf girl. She was the daughter of Marcus Coleman, whose name appeared on aviation executive boards across 3 continents. She was the granddaughter of Ruby Coleman, whose family had been fighting injustice since before the civil rights movement had a name. And when those 2 forces of nature learned what had been done to their baby girl, the entire aviation industry would discover that some crowns, once cut, grow back as weapons. The last lock fell at 3:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that would be remembered as the day one man's arrogance brought down an entire airline. But first, there would be tears. There would be rage. And there would be a phone call that would echo through boardrooms and courthouses for years to come. Nia Coleman was about to learn that sometimes the most powerful voice belongs to the girl who cannot speak at all. What do you think should happen to people who abuse their power like this? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and your voice matters in this conversation. Now, let's see how this incredible story unfolds. 3,000 miles away in his corner office overlooking the Pacific, Marcus Coleman ended his conference call with Boeing executives and reached for his coffee, unaware that his world was about to shatter. The walls of his office told the story of a man who'd clawed his way from the projects of Detroit to the pinnacle of aviation power, photos with presidents, awards from the NAACP, and a framed letter from his daughter thanking him for never letting the world make me small. Marcus had built Coleman Aviation Consulting from nothing, transforming it into the firm that airlines called when they needed to survive scandals, navigate regulations, or salvage their reputations. His client list read like a who's who of the industry: Delta, American, United, Southwest, and yes, even Atlantic Airways, the budget carrier that was about to learn the true cost of employing racist flight attendants. But Marcus's greatest achievement wasn't hanging on any wall. It was a 14-year-old girl with her grandmother's eyes and a spirit that refused to be broken, no matter how many surgeries the doctors said she needed or how many kids at school pretended not to see her signing. Nia was his heart walking around outside his body, and he'd moved mountains to ensure she never felt the sting of being less than that had defined his own childhood. 2 time zones east, in a modest Atlanta home filled with the smell of sweet potato pie and the sound of gospel music, Ruby Coleman was teaching her neighbor's grandson how to braid when her phone buzzed. At 73, Ruby had raised 5 children, buried a husband, and survived segregation, but nothing had prepared her for the video message that appeared on her screen. The grainy phone footage showed her granddaughter, her precious baby who'd been through more pain in 14 years than most people experience in a lifetime, sitting helplessly while a white man in uniform destroyed the locks Ruby had spent 5 years helping her grow. The same locks Ruby had taught her to care for as an act of self-love, the same locks that connected Nia to generations of women who'd been told their natural beauty wasn't good enough. Ruby's hands, weathered from decades of domestic work before Marcus's success changed everything, trembled as she watched her granddaughter's silent sobs. This wasn't just about hair. This was about a legacy of strength being cut down by ignorance, about a child who'd already fought so hard for her place in the world being told she still didn't belong. Meanwhile, in Terminal 4, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a child psychologist returning from a conference in London, had watched the entire incident unfold from Gate B23. She'd seen discrimination before, had written papers on the psychological impact of institutional racism on children, but witnessing it in real time left her nauseated. The deaf girl's frantic signing, the flight attendant's smugness, the crowd's mixture of outrage and paralysis. It was a case study in systematic oppression playing out in an airport corridor. Sarah pulled out her business card and approached Nia gently, tapping her shoulder and offering a kind smile. When Nia looked up with tear-streaked cheeks, Sarah held up her phone with a typed message: "I'm a doctor. I saw what happened. You did nothing wrong. Do you need help calling someone?" Back in the airline's crew lounge, Ethan Shaw was bragging to his colleagues about maintaining professional standards while scrolling through the tips in his Venmo account, deposits from passengers who'd rewarded his courage in handling the situation. At 32, Ethan had spent 8 years as a flight attendant, nursing grievances about being passed over for promotions while watching diversity hires advance around him. To him, cutting a black girl's hair wasn't racism, it was finally taking a stand. He had no idea that the unprofessional girl whose heritage he'd scattered across the floor was about to become the most expensive mistake Atlantic Airways had ever made. Because in families like the Colemans, love wasn't just an emotion, it was a force of nature with corporate lawyers on speed dial and senators in the contact list. And when that force awakened, it didn't just seek justice. It demanded earthquakes. Nia's phone finally connected to her grandmother's FaceTime, and through her tears, she began signing the words that would launch a war. "Grandma, he cut my crown. I can already feel the righteous anger building. Can you? This is about so much more than hair, and I know you understand that. If this story is resonating with you, please share it with someone who needs to see it." Sometimes change starts with one person deciding they won't stay silent anymore. Ruby Coleman's hands shook as she watched her granddaughter's broken face fill the phone screen, but her voice carried the steel of 4 generations of women who'd refused to bow. "Baby girl," she said, knowing Nia could read her lips, "you look at Grandma. That man didn't cut your crown, he just showed the world his ignorance. Your crown grows from the inside, you hear me?" But even Ruby's strength couldn't stop the tremor in her voice as she watched Nia hold up fistfuls of severed locks, each one a memory they'd created together. The video call connection was poor, but the devastation was crystal clear. Ruby had survived Mississippi in the 1960s, had watched crosses burn in yards and friends disappear in the night, but seeing her granddaughter's dignity destroyed in broad daylight in 2024 felt like being thrown back into the darkest chapters of American history. "I'm calling your father," Ruby mouthed, and Nia nodded through her tears. The phone rang twice before Marcus picked up. "Hey, Mama Ruby, I'm just wrapping up a meeting with Marcus Jerome Coleman. You sit down and you listen to me right now." Ruby's voice carried the authority that had raised 5 successful children and could stop a room full of executives mid-sentence. "Someone hurt our baby." Marcus's blood went cold. In 30 seconds, Ruby painted a picture that shattered his world. His daughter, his brilliant, resilient, beautiful daughter, humiliated and assaulted by an airline employee while traveling on the business class ticket he bought her as a celebration gift. The same airline that paid his firm over $2 million annually for crisis management consulting. "Atlantic Airways," Marcus repeated, his voice deadly quiet. "Flight 447. Marcus, I've seen the video. That man looked at our child like she was nothing. Cut her hair like she was livestock being groomed for slaughter." Ruby's voice broke. "She's asking me why God made her different if people are just going to hate her for it." Marcus closed his eyes, remembering the 7-year-old Nia who'd asked him the same question after her 3rd surgery, when kids at school started calling her robot ears because of her cochlear implant. He'd promised her then that her differences made her stronger, that the world would learn to celebrate what made her special. Now that same world had taken scissors to her self-worth. "Mama, I need you to drive to JFK. Now. Get Nia and bring her home. I'll handle Atlantic Airways." Marcus's voice carried the calm that preceded corporate warfare. "And Mama? Start recording everything. Every conversation, every interaction. This ends today." While Ruby grabbed her keys, Dr. Sarah Mitchell was having her own revelation. She'd stayed with Nia until airport security finally intervened, but something about the incident nagged at her professional mind. She'd studied institutional racism for years, had written extensively about microaggressions in the workplace, but this wasn't micro, this was assault with witnesses, performed by someone who clearly believed he was untouchable. Sarah pulled up Atlantic Airways' corporate structure on her phone. The airline had been struggling financially for months, laying off staff and cutting corners on everything from safety inspections to customer service training. But they'd also been in the news recently for a different reason, a discrimination lawsuit filed by black pilots who claimed systemic racism in promotion practices. Her phone buzzed with a text from her colleague at Columbia. "Sarah, are you seeing the video going viral of the flight attendant cutting that deaf girl's hair? This is insane." Viral. The word hit Sarah like ice water. In the age of social media, Nia's humiliation wouldn't stay contained to Terminal 4. By tomorrow, her trauma would be trending hashtags and think pieces. The girl had been victimized once by Ethan Shaw's scissors, and now she was about to be victimized again by the internet's hunger for outrage content. Meanwhile, Ethan Shaw was discovering that his moment of taking a stand was becoming the most expensive haircut in aviation history. His supervisor, Janet Reeves, had pulled him into an office where Atlantic Airways' head of customer relations was already on speakerphone with legal. "Ethan, help me understand," Janet said, her face pale. "You cut a passenger's hair. A miner's hair. A deaf miner's hair. Without permission. Because you thought her natural hairstyle was unprofessional." "She was in business class," Ethan said, his earlier swagger fading. "There are appearance standards. I was maintaining." "What appearance standards?" The voice from the speakerphone belonged to Harold Vance, Atlantic Airways' chief legal officer. "Show me the manual that says flight attendants can forcibly alter passengers' hairstyles. Show me the training that covers hair discrimination. Show me anything that justifies what I'm watching on this security footage." Ethan's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. The righteousness that had fueled his actions 3 hours ago was evaporating under the heat of corporate liability. There are standards about professional appearance and— "For employees, you moron," Janet snapped. "Not for passengers. Passengers can board our planes with purple mohawks and face tattoos as long as they have tickets and aren't threatening safety. You just assaulted a child because you didn't like her hair." The room fell silent except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sound of departure announcements. Harold Vance's voice crackled through the speakerphone like a death sentence. "Ethan Shaw, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the premises. And God help us all, because this is about to get very expensive very quickly." As Ethan was marched past gate B23, he saw Nia still sitting in the same chair, her grandmother's arms wrapped around her like armor, Dr. Sarah Mitchell speaking quietly with airport security. The sight of his victim should have triggered remorse, should have sparked some recognition of the pain he'd caused. Instead, Ethan felt only anger. At the airline for not backing him up. At the girl for causing trouble. At a world that was changing too fast and leaving people like him behind. He had no idea that the girl he'd tried to diminish was about to become the catalyst for the largest discrimination settlement in aviation history. Or that her father had just placed a call that would begin unraveling Atlantic Airways thread by thread. Because when you attack someone's child, you don't just fight that parent, you awaken every ancestor who'd ever fought for that family's dignity. And the Coleman family tree had roots that ran deep into soil watered by centuries of resistance. Marcus Coleman was about to remind the aviation industry why his name appeared on every major crisis management contract in the business. But this time, he wouldn't be cleaning up someone else's mess. He'd be creating one that would bring down an entire airline. This is the moment everything changes, isn't it? When families like this decide they've had enough, the whole world shifts. If you're feeling that fire building inside you, drop a comment and let me know. Your energy fuels stories like this, and together we're building something powerful here. 24 hours after the incident, the Coleman family's world had transformed into a war room. Marcus's penthouse apartment in Manhattan buzzed with a controlled chaos of corporate warfare, laptops humming, phones ringing constantly, and legal documents spreading across every surface like battle plans. But in the center of it all sat Nia, her shorn head wrapped in one of Ruby's handmade scarves, watching the adults fight her battles while she struggled to process her new reality. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had arrived that morning with more than just moral support. She'd brought something far more valuable, her expertise as both a child psychologist and an expert witness in discrimination cases. But she'd also brought something unexpected. Her son. Daniel Mitchell Rivera was 26, a civil rights attorney fresh from winning a landmark case against the NYPD, and exactly the kind of passionate advocate the Colemans needed. He was also, Nia noticed with a sharp awareness that only teenagers possess, absolutely gorgeous. His warm brown eyes held the same fierce intelligence as his mother's, and when he'd introduced himself to Nia in fluent ASL, she'd felt her heart skip in a way that had nothing to do with her cochlear implant malfunctioning. "Your grandmother tells me you're on a roll," Daniel signed, settling into the chair across from her while the adults strategized in the kitchen. "What's your favorite subject?" "Creative writing," Nia signed back, surprised by his perfect grammar and fluid movements. "Most people don't sign this well unless they're deaf themselves." Daniel's smile was gentle but tinged with understanding. "My little sister was born deaf. I learned because I wanted to tell her bedtime stories she could see, not just feel through vibrations." He paused, studying Nia's face with professional concern. "How are you holding up? Really?" For the first time since the incident, someone was asking about her feelings, not her legal case or her father's business implications. Nia felt tears threatening again. "I keep touching my head and forgetting," she signed. 5 years of growth, gone. My grandmother says hair grows back, but it wasn't just hair," Daniel finished, his expression darkening. "It was your identity, your heritage, your autonomy. Someone violated all of that because they thought they had the right." The fact that he understood, truly understood, made something flutter in Nia's chest that she'd never experienced before. She'd had crushes on boys at school, but they were always hearing boys who treated her sign language like a party trick or an inconvenience. Daniel spoke her language literally and figuratively, and the combination was intoxicating. Meanwhile, Marcus was discovering that his professional relationships in the aviation industry were more fragile than he'd realized. His phone call to David Sterling, Atlantic Airways CEO and former friend, had gone from cordial to hostile in record time. "Marcus, I understand you're upset." David's voice carried the patronizing tone of someone accustomed to making problems disappear with money. "But let's be reasonable here. Shaw was a rogue employee. We fired him immediately. We're willing to offer compensation." Compensation. Marcus's voice was ice. "David, they assaulted my child. Your employee looked at my 14-year-old daughter and decided she didn't deserve to exist as God made her. You think money fixes that?" "I think litigation hurts everyone involved," David replied smoothly. "Your daughter's been through enough trauma. Dragging this through courts and media will only make it worse. Take the settlement, Marcus. Take the settlement and let's move on." The dismissive tone, the casual assumption that Marcus would prioritize money over justice, crystallized something in Marcus's mind. This wasn't just about one racist flight attendant anymore. This was about an entire industry that viewed discrimination as a line item on a balance sheet, a cost of doing business that could be managed with NDAs and hush money. "David," Marcus said quietly, "I want you to remember this conversation when you're explaining to your board why Atlantic Airways no longer exists as a company." The line went dead. Across town, Ethan Shaw was learning that getting fired was just the beginning of his problems. The viral video had identified him by name, and his social media accounts were being flooded with death threats, doxing attempts, and corporate HR departments adding him to industry-wide blacklists. His girlfriend had left him, his landlord was threatening eviction due to protesters outside his building, and every job application he'd submitted had been rejected within hours. But instead of reflecting on his actions, Ethan was doubling down on his resentment. He'd hired Trevor Baldwin, a lawyer who specialized in defending people accused of hate crimes, and together they were crafting a narrative of victimization that painted Ethan as the real casualty of cancel culture gone mad. "We're going to argue that Shaw was following company policy," Trevor explained over burnt coffee in his cramped office. Atlantic Airways had appearance standards for business-class passengers. Shaw was enforcing those standards in a colorblind manner. The fact that the passenger happened to be black is irrelevant. Never mind that no such policy existed. Never mind that Atlantic Airways' own executives had called Shaw's actions indefensible. In Trevor's world, alternative facts were just facts that hadn't been properly marketed yet. Back in the Coleman apartment, Dr. Sarah was reviewing security footage with the same analytical eye she brought to her research. What she saw made her stomach turn, not just the obvious cruelty, but the calculated nature of it. Ethan hadn't acted in anger or panic. He'd approached Nia with scissors already in hand, had positioned himself to be recorded, had performed his violence like theater. "This wasn't spontaneous," Sarah told Marcus and Ruby as Nia and Daniel continued their conversation in the living room. "Shaw came prepared. He wanted to be seen doing this. Which means this isn't just discrimination, it's premeditated assault with intent to humiliate." Ruby looked up from the photo album she'd been showing Marcus. 5 years of pictures documenting Nia's locked journey from tiny sprouts to the beautiful crown that now lay in an airport trash can. "That man wanted to break my grandbaby's spirit," she said quietly. "Wanted to make her feel small and ashamed of who she is." "Well," Marcus replied, watching Daniel teach Nia some advanced ASL poetry techniques that made her laugh for the first time since the incident, he picked the wrong family to test that theory on. As evening fell over Manhattan, the Coleman family was discovering that fighting injustice had an unexpected side effect. It was bringing them closer than they'd been in years. Nia found herself stealing glances at Daniel as he helped her draft a victim impact statement, marveling at how someone could be both professionally brilliant and personally kind. Daniel, meanwhile, was trying to maintain professional boundaries while being increasingly charmed by Nia's fierce intelligence and quiet strength. But their growing connection wasn't happening in a vacuum. Outside, protesters were gathering in support of Nia, social media was erupting with #JusticeForNia hashtags, and Atlantic Airways' stock price was beginning to plummet as investors realized the true scope of the crisis they were facing. The war was escalating, alliances were forming, And in the eye of the storm, a 14-year-old girl was discovering that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can also lead to the most beautiful connections you never saw coming. But first, there would be a revelation that would change everything they thought they knew about Ethan Shaw's motives. And when that truth came to light, even Marcus's appetite for corporate destruction would seem gentle compared to the reckoning that was coming. Can you feel how the stakes keep rising? And that connection between Nia and Daniel, there's something special growing there, isn't there? Love has a way of blooming even in the darkest soil. If you're invested in seeing where this goes, hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you won't want to miss the bombshell that's coming in the next part. The truth arrived at 2:47 a.m. in the form of an encrypted email that would shatter everything the Coleman family thought they knew about Ethan Shaw's attack on Nia. Daniel had been working late in Marcus's study, cross-referencing Atlantic Airways employment records with discrimination complaints, when his laptop chimed with a message from an anonymous sender. The subject line read, "You need to see this. Shaw wasn't acting alone." Daniel's blood went cold as he opened the attached files. Bank records, text message screenshots, audio recordings, email threads. What emerged was a conspiracy so calculated and vicious that it made Ethan Shaw look like a mere puppet in a much larger show. "Mr. Coleman," Daniel called quietly, not wanting to wake Nia or Ruby. "You need to see this. Now." Marcus appeared in the doorway within seconds, his paternal instincts sharp even in sleep. One look at Daniel's face told him this wasn't about legal strategy anymore. This was about something that would change the fundamental nature of their fight. The files painted a picture that made Daniel's hands shake as he clicked through them. For 6 months, a group calling itself the Professional Standards Alliance had been operating within Atlantic Airways, targeting passengers they deemed undesirable for business class. The group, led by senior flight attendant Patricia Wells and funded by anonymous donors, had developed a systematic approach to humiliating passengers they viewed as unworthy of premium treatment. "Look at this," Daniel whispered, pointing to a group chat screenshot. "They call it Operation Cleanup. They identify passengers who don't fit their image of what business class should look like, then create situations to embarrass or remove them." Marcus leaned closer, reading the messages that made his stomach turn. Patricia Wells, young black girl in 3A tomorrow. Dreadlocks, deaf. Perfect candidate. Ethan Shaw, I can handle it. Got the scissors ready. Face with tears of joy. Patricia Wells, make sure someone records it. We need documentation for the file. Unknown user, beautiful work team. The donors will be pleased. Next payment incoming. But it was the next file that made Marcus's world tilt on its axis. A bank statement showing payments to Patricia Wells from Meridian Hospitality Group, the parent company of Atlantic Airways' biggest competitor, Pinnacle Airlines. The same Pinnacle Airlines whose CEO, Victoria Cross, had been trying to acquire Atlantic Airways' European routes for 3 years. They were being paid, Marcus said, the words barely audible. Someone paid them to destroy my daughter. Daniel scrolled to the final document, an email that spelled out the conspiracy in devastating detail. Victoria Cross's assistant had been funding the Professional Standards Alliance to create viral incidents that would damage Atlantic Airways' reputation, making it easier for Pinnacle to acquire their routes at bankruptcy prices. Nia wasn't just the victim of racist violence. She was collateral damage in a corporate takeover scheme. "There's more," Daniel said, his voice hollow. "Look at this list." The file contained names and photos of 17 other passengers who'd been targeted over the past 6 months. A Latino family removed from first class for suspicious behavior. An elderly Sikh man forced to remove his turban for security reasons. A transgender woman denied access to the business class restroom. All incidents that had gone viral, all contributing to Atlantic Airways' plummeting stock price. And at the bottom of the list, circled in red, was Nia's photo, taken from Marcus's own LinkedIn profile where he'd proudly posted about her honor roll achievement and surprise business class trip. "They knew exactly who she was," Marcus whispered. They knew she was my daughter. This wasn't random racism. This was targeted corporate warfare using my child as ammunition. The revelation hit Marcus like a physical blow. His daughter hadn't been the victim of one bigoted flight attendant. She'd been systematically selected and hunted by a conspiracy that stretched from Atlantic Airways crew quarters to Pinnacle Airline's executive boardroom. The attack on her dignity, her heritage, her very sense of self had been calculated down to the penny. Daniel was already pulling up corporate filings, his legal mind racing. If we can prove this connection, it's not just discrimination anymore. It's conspiracy, corporate espionage, child endangerment, and about 6 other federal crimes. But Marcus was thinking about something else, the phone call he'd received 3 days before Nia's trip. Victoria Cross had called personally, suggesting they meet to discuss opportunities for collaboration between their firms. She'd even asked casually about his family, mentioning she'd seen his posts about his daughter's achievements. She played me, Marcus said, his voice carrying a fury that Daniel had never heard from him. Victoria Cross set this whole thing up. Used my own social media posts to target my child, then called to gloat about it before it even happened. The study fell silent except for the hum of laptops and the distant sound of New York traffic. Both men were processing the magnitude of what they'd discovered. This wasn't just about justice for Nia anymore. This was about exposing a conspiracy that had traumatized dozens of innocent passengers and was being funded by one of the most powerful women in aviation. "We have to tell Nia," Daniel said finally. "She deserves to know that what happened to her was even more calculated than we thought." Marcus shook his head. "Not yet. First, we destroy them. All of them. Shaw, Wells, Cross. Everyone who thought they could use my daughter as a pawn in their corporate games." But in the living room, Nia was already awake, having felt the vibrations of urgent voices through the apartment's thin walls. She'd learned to read body language and energy like other people read books, and the tension radiating from the study told her something catastrophic had been discovered. She padded quietly to the doorway, her bare feet silent on the hardwood, and watched her father and Daniel hunched over the laptop screen like warriors planning a siege. The sight of Daniel's protective posture, the way he positioned himself between her father's rage and the door to her room, made something warm unfurl in her chest despite the late hour. When Daniel looked up and saw her, his expression shifted immediately from legal strategist to concerned protector. Without hesitation, he stood and moved to her, his hands beginning to sign before he was even close enough for her to read his lips. "How much did you hear?" he asked in ASL. "Enough," Nia signed back. It was bigger than just that flight attendant, wasn't it? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Nia had survived 7 surgeries, years of therapy, and a lifetime of being underestimated because of her deafness. She'd earned the right to know the full truth about what had been done to her, no matter how ugly that truth might be. Marcus looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the traumatized child he'd been trying to protect, but the young woman she was becoming. Strong, intelligent, and deserving of honesty even when that honesty was devastating. "Yes," he said, making sure she could see his lips clearly. "It was much bigger. And we're going to make sure everyone responsible pays for what they did to you." Nia nodded once, her jaw set with determination that came straight from her grandmother's genes. "Good," she signed. "Because I'm tired of people thinking deaf girls are easy targets." In that moment, Daniel fell completely in love with her fierce spirit. Marcus felt his paternal pride surge beyond measure, and somewhere in Pinnacle Airline's corporate headquarters, Victoria Cross was about to discover that she'd awakened forces that would tear her empire apart brick by brick. The war was no longer about discrimination or corporate liability. It was about a family that had been systematically hunted, a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the aviation industry, and a 14-year-old girl who was about to become the most expensive mistake Victoria Cross had ever made. Because when you target someone's child as part of a corporate chess game, you don't just face that parent's wrath. You face the fury of everyone who's ever loved that child. And the Coleman family loved with the force of hurricanes. This changes everything, doesn't it? A whole conspiracy targeting innocent passengers for corporate profits. using children as weapons in their games. I'm getting chills just thinking about what's coming next. If this revelation hit you as hard as it hit me, smash that like button and tell me in the comments, what should happen to people who hurt children for money? Because this family is about to show us exactly what justice looks like. 3 weeks after the revelation, the Coleman family's world was crumbling. What should have been their moment of triumph, armed with evidence of a massive conspiracy, had instead become their darkest nightmare. Victoria Cross wasn't just powerful, she was untouchable in ways Marcus had never imagined. The first blow came through Daniel's law firm. His senior partner, Robert Chun, called him into a closed-door meeting that lasted exactly 4 minutes. The Coleman case is reassigned, Chun said without preamble, sliding a termination letter across his mahogany desk. You're off it. Effective immediately. Daniel stared at the paper in disbelief. Robert, we have evidence of federal conspiracy. We're talking about RICO charges, corporate espionage. We're talking about career suicide, Chin interrupted. 3 of our biggest clients have threatened to pull their contracts if we continue representing the Colemans. Pinnacle Airlines has friends everywhere, Daniel. Powerful friends. So we just abandon a 14-year-old girl who was targeted by corporate terrorists? We follow the money that keeps this firm's lights on, Chin replied coldly. Clear out your office. Security will escort you out in an hour. As Daniel packed his files in a cardboard box, his phone buzzed with a text from Nia. Are you coming over tonight? Grandma's making her famous mac and cheese, and I want to show you the poem I wrote about invisible crowns. The thought of telling her that he could no longer fight for her justice made him physically nauseous. Meanwhile, Marcus was discovering that his own power in the aviation industry had been an illusion built on quicksand. One by one, his clients were terminating their contracts. The excuses were always the same: budget restructuring, strategic realignment, new corporate priorities. But the message was crystal clear: choose the Coleman case or choose your livelihood. You can't have both. David Sterling's call came at 11 p.m., when Marcus was staring at termination letters spread across his dining room table like obituaries. I tried to warn you, David's voice carried false sympathy. Victoria Cross has influence you can't comprehend. Supreme Court justices, Senate majority leaders, Fortune 500 CEOs, they all owe her favors. You think your little discrimination case scares her? It should, Marcus replied, though his voice lacked its usual conviction. We have evidence. Evidence that will disappear, David interrupted. Witnesses who will recant. Bank records that will be explained as legitimate business expenses. Marcus, I'm calling as a friend. Drop this case. Take your daughter somewhere quiet and let her heal. Because if you keep pushing, Victoria won't just destroy your business. She'll destroy your family. The line went dead, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of 20 years of reputation and influence crumbling around him. But the cruelest blow was yet to come. Dr. Sarah Mitchell was forced to withdraw her expert testimony when Columbia University threatened her tenure and research funding. The anonymous whistleblower who'd sent the conspiracy files disappeared entirely, their email account deleted, their digital footprint scrubbed clean. Even worse, new evidence began surfacing that painted Ethan Shaw as a scapegoat rather than a conspirator. Trevor Baldwin, Shaw's sleazy attorney, held a press conference that was broadcast live across every major network. My client was a dedicated employee following what he believed to be company policy. The real criminals here are the Coleman family and their legal team, who have manufactured a conspiracy theory to extort money from hard-working airline companies. Ethan Shaw is the victim of an elaborate hoax designed to destroy an innocent man's life. The press conference featured carefully edited video footage that made Shaw's attack on Nia look less brutal, witness statements from Atlantic Airways employees claiming Shaw was just doing his job, and most devastatingly, a recording of Marcus allegedly threatening to destroy anyone who gets in my way, taken completely out of context from a business call years earlier. Public opinion, which had been solidly behind Nia, began to shift. Social media filled with posts questioning whether the Coleman family had manufactured the conspiracy evidence. Hashtag Ethan Shar Innocent began trending alongside cruel memes mocking Nia's sign language and suggesting her deafness made her an unreliable witness to her own assault. The breaking point came when Nia returned to school after a month of recovery. She'd hoped her classmates would be supportive, maybe even proud that she was standing up for herself. Instead, she walked into a cafeteria full of whispers and pointing fingers. "There's the girl whose family made up that whole conspiracy thing," someone said loud enough for her to read their lips. "My dad says her father's a con artist who targets airlines for money," another added. "She probably asked them to cut her hair so she could sue." Nia ran to the bathroom and locked herself in a stall, her silent sobs shaking her entire body. For weeks, she'd felt like a warrior fighting for justice. Now she felt like a fool who'd believed in fairy tales about good triumphing over evil. When she got home that afternoon, she found Daniel packing his law books into boxes in her father's study. "You're leaving us too," she signed, the statement hanging between them like a death sentence. Daniel's face crumpled. "Nia, I don't want to. I'm being forced to." "Everyone's being forced," she interrupted, her hands moving with angry precision. "Everyone has excuses. Everyone has reasons why they can't help us anymore." "It's not an excuse," Daniel said desperately. "These people have power we can't fight. They own judges, senators, entire media networks. They're making it impossible. So you're giving up on me." The accusation hit Daniel like a physical blow. "I'm not giving up on you. I'm trying to protect you. If we keep fighting this, they'll destroy your whole family. Your father will lose everything. Your grandmother could lose her house. You could lose your college fund, your future. I've already lost everything." Nia's hands flew with furious energy. "My hair, my dignity, my safety, my trust in justice. What more can they take? My family? Fine. Take them. Take everything. Just don't pretend you're leaving to protect me when you're really leaving to protect yourself." Daniel reached for her, but she stepped back, her eyes blazing with betrayal and heartbreak. "I thought you were different," she signed. "I thought you actually cared about me, not just my case. But you're just like everyone else, brave until it costs you something." She turned and ran to her room, slamming the door behind her and leaving Daniel standing among his packed boxes, feeling like he'd just destroyed the most important thing in his life. That night, as Ruby held her sobbing granddaughter and Marcus stared at bankruptcy papers, the Coleman family faced the terrible possibility that some battles couldn't be won. That sometimes, even when you're right, even when you have evidence, even when justice is on your side, the powerful stay powerful and the victims stay broken. Victoria Cross had played her hand perfectly. She'd turned Marcus's greatest strength, his reputation and connections, into weapons against him. She'd isolated the family from their allies, discredited their evidence, and poisoned public opinion. Worst of all, she'd driven a wedge between Nia and Daniel, destroying the one relationship that had given the girl hope during her darkest moments. As Nia cried herself to sleep that night, her head still wrapped in her grandmother's scarf, she wondered if her grandmother had been wrong. Maybe some crowns, once cut, never grew back. Maybe some battles were too big for even the strongest families to fight. Maybe Victoria Cross had already won. Outside her window, New York City glittered with the cold light of a world that didn't care about one deaf girl's broken heart or her family's shattered dreams. The powerful slept soundly in their penthouses while the Colemans lay awake, wondering if they'd lost everything by daring to believe that justice was more than just a word. But in the darkest hours before dawn, when hope seems most impossible, that's often when the most unexpected allies emerge from the shadows. And Victoria Cross, for all her power and influence, had made one crucial miscalculation in her war against the Coleman family. She'd underestimated the fury of a man who's willing to lose everything to save his daughter's soul. This is devastating, isn't it? Watching everything fall apart just when they thought they had the truth on their side. But don't you feel it? That quiet rage building in the darkness? Sometimes you have to lose everything before you're free enough to fight without limits. If you're feeling that fire, that refusal to accept injustice, drop a comment and let me know. Because I have a feeling the Coleman family isn't done fighting yet. The resurrection began at 4:17 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, in the most unlikely place possible, the comment section of a YouTube video titled "Deaf Girl's Family Exposed as Fraudsters." Nia had been unable to sleep, scrolling through the endless stream of hate directed at her family, when she noticed something strange. Between the cruel memes and accusations, there were dozens of comments from people sharing their own stories, stories that sounded remarkably familiar. This happened to my sister on Atlantic Airways last year. Latino family, first class, removed for suspicious behavior. We couldn't afford lawyers, so we stayed quiet. My grandfather, Sikh man, forced to remove turban on Atlantic Airways. They said it was policy, but other airlines never had problems. Transgender woman here. Atlantic Airways flight attendant humiliated me in business class 6 months ago. Made me use economy bathroom. Said I was disturbing other passengers. I thought I was alone. African exchange student. Atlantic Airways crew lost my business class seat, moved me to economy. Said there was overbooking, but plane wasn't full. I have photos. 17 stories. 17 victims. Each one describing incidents that matched the conspiracy files exactly. The same flight routes, the same crew members, the same calculated humiliation. Victoria Cross had been so focused on discrediting the Coleman family that she'd overlooked the most powerful weapon of all, the voices of the other survivors. With shaking hands, Nia began copying the comments into a document. Names, dates, flight numbers, detailed accounts of systematic discrimination. By dawn, she had enough evidence to rebuild their case from the ground up, not with corporate whistleblowers or bank records that could disappear, but with human testimony that couldn't be erased. At 6 a.m., she knocked on her father's bedroom door. Marcus opened it looking like he'd aged a decade in the past week, unshaven, hollow-eyed, surrounded by the wreckage of his professional life. But when he saw the light in his daughter's eyes, something stirred in his chest that he'd thought Victoria Cross had killed forever. "Dad," Nia signed, her hands moving with urgent excitement. They made a mistake. They thought if they silenced us, everyone would forget. But the internet never forgets. And neither do victims. She showed him the document, page after page of testimonies from people who'd been targeted by the same conspiracy. People who'd thought they were alone, who'd been too scared or too powerless to fight back individually, but who together represented an army of witnesses that no amount of corporate influence could silence. "We don't need anonymous whistleblowers," Nia continued, her signs rapid with growing confidence. "We don't need bank records that can disappear. We have something better. We have people who are tired of being quiet." Marcus stared at his daughter, really looked at her, and saw not the broken child he'd been trying to protect, but the warrior she'd become. Somewhere in the depths of their darkest hour, Nia had found her voice, and that voice was calling other victims out of the shadows. "How do we reach them?" Marcus asked, his strategic mind already spinning back to life. "We don't reach them," Nia replied with a smile that reminded him of Ruby's fierce determination. "They reach us. But first, we need Daniel." The drive to Daniel's apartment took 20 minutes, but felt like 20 years. Marcus wasn't sure if the young lawyer would even speak to them after the way Nia had ended things. But when Daniel opened the door and saw Nia standing there with tears in her eyes and apology in her hands, he didn't hesitate. "I'm sorry," she signed before he could speak. "I was scared and hurt, and I took it out on you. You were trying to protect me, and I—" Daniel crossed the distance between them in 2 steps and pulled her into a hug that felt like coming home. "No, I'm sorry. I should have fought harder. Should have found another way. Should have trusted that you're strong enough to handle whatever they threw at us. Are you willing to fight with us again?" Nia asked, pulling back to look at his face. "Not as my lawyer, but as someone who cares about me." "I never stopped caring about you," Daniel replied, switching to sign language so Marcus couldn't misinterpret his words as purely professional. "I love you, Nia Coleman. Not your case, not your cause, you. And if you'll let me, I want to help you change the world." The kiss that followed was soft and fierce and full of promises that neither of them had dared to hope for during the past week of separation. It was a first kiss and a reunion and a declaration of war all wrapped into one perfect moment. Marcus cleared his throat loudly, but he was smiling. "If you two are done declaring your feelings in my hallway, we have a conspiracy to expose." Back in Daniel's apartment, the three of them spread Nia's document across the coffee table like battle plans. Daniel read through the testimonies with the focused intensity of a lawyer who'd found his cause again, while Marcus made phone calls to the three reporters he knew who couldn't be bought by Victoria Cross's influence. "This changes everything," Daniel said finally. "A corporate conspiracy is hard to prove. But systematic discrimination with multiple victims across state lines? That's a federal civil rights violation with criminal penalties. They can't make 17 victims disappear." "What do we need to do?" Marcus asked. Daniel was already pulling up legal databases on his laptop. "We need these victims to go on record. Official statements, sworn affidavits. We need to file a class action lawsuit that's too big and too public for Victoria Cross to kill quietly. And we need to do it fast, before they realize what we're building." "How fast?" Nia asked. 72 hours, Daniel replied. "I can file the paperwork by Friday if we can get statements from at least 10 of these victims by Thursday." Marcus was already reaching for his phone. "Ruby," he said when his mother-in-law answered, "how do you feel about becoming a social media influencer? Because we need to get a message out that Victoria Cross can't control." What followed was the most unlikely war room in legal history. A 14-year-old deaf girl, her bankrupt father, his elderly mother-in-law, and a lovesick lawyer working around the clock to rebuild a case from the ashes of corporate manipulation. Ruby learned how to use Twitter and Instagram, becoming the grandmother the internet never knew it needed as she shared Nia's story and asked other victims to come forward. Marcus leveraged the one resource Victoria Cross couldn't take away from him, his reputation for honesty. He went on every podcast, every small news station, every social media platform that would have him, telling the truth about what had been done to his daughter and asking other families to share their stories. Daniel worked 18-hour days drafting legal documents, preparing affidavits, and building a case that would be impossible to dismiss or discredit. But it was Nia who became the heart of their resurrection. She created video messages in sign language that were subtitled and shared across every platform, speaking directly to other victims with the authority of someone who'd survived the same trauma. Her honesty, her vulnerability, and her refusal to be silenced resonated with people who'd been carrying their own wounds in silence for too long. By Wednesday night, they had statements from 13 victims. By Thursday morning, the number had grown to 21. And by Thursday afternoon, when Daniel walked into federal court to file Coleman versus Atlantic Airways and Pinnacle Airlines, he was representing 47 plaintiffs in what would become the largest airline discrimination case in U.S. history. Victoria Cross had made one fatal error in her war against the Coleman family. She'd assumed that destroying their institutional power would destroy their ability to fight. But she'd forgotten that the most dangerous enemies aren't the ones with money and connections. They're the ones with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. As news of the massive class action lawsuit broke across every major network, as stock prices for both airlines plummeted, as federal investigators announced they were opening a criminal probe into the conspiracy, Nia Coleman sat in her father's apartment watching the world finally listen to her story. Her hair was still short, her head still wrapped in Ruby's scarves. But something had changed in her eyes, a quiet strength that no amount of corporate manipulation could cut away. She'd learned that real power didn't come from positions or titles or bank accounts. Real power came from refusing to stay silent when the world tried to make you disappear. And as Victoria Cross frantically called emergency board meetings and activated every favor she'd ever been owed, she was about to discover that sometimes the girl who cannot hear is indeed the one who makes the entire world listen. The final battle was about to begin. Yes, this is what I'm talking about. When good people refuse to stay down, when love conquers fear, when victims find their voices, that's when real change happens. Can you feel that energy building? That unstoppable force of justice finally awakening? If you're getting goosebumps like I am, let me know in the comments. Because we're about to witness something beautiful. The moment David doesn't just fight Goliath. David brings 47 friends to the battle. The federal courthouse in Manhattan had never seen anything like it. 47 plaintiffs, their families, and hundreds of supporters filled every seat in Judge Patricia Washington's courtroom for what legal scholars would later call the trial of the decade. But for Nia Coleman, sitting between her father and Daniel in the front row, it felt like the entire world had finally decided to listen. Victoria Cross entered the courtroom like a queen surveying conquered territory. $5,000 suit, diamond earrings, and an entourage of 12 lawyers who'd collectively billed more hours than most people worked in a year. She'd survived congressional hearings, SEC investigations, and hostile takeovers. One deaf girl and her collection of sob stories wouldn't be the thing that brought down her empire. But as she took her seat, Victoria made the mistake of looking directly at Nia. What she saw in the girl's eyes, not fear or intimidation, but quiet, unshakable resolve, sent the first tremor of doubt through her corporate armor. Daniel stood to deliver his opening statement, and the passion in his voice filled the cavernous courtroom like thunder. Your Honor, this case is about more than discrimination. It's about a systematic conspiracy to terrorize innocent passengers for corporate profit. It's about executives who looked at children, elderly people, and vulnerable travelers and saw them not as human beings, but as pawns in a billion-dollar game. And it's about 47 brave souls who refused to stay silent when the powerful tried to make them disappear. He gestured to the plaintiff section, where Nia sat surrounded by the other victims, the Latino family, the elderly Sikh man, the transgender woman, the African exchange student, and dozens more whose stories have been buried under corporate influence until now. But most of all, Daniel continued, his eyes finding Nia's, this case is about a 14-year-old girl who was targeted not because of what she did, but because of who she was born to. A girl whose hair was cut not by one racist flight attendant, but by a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of corporate America. A girl who shows us that sometimes the most powerful voice belongs to the person who cannot speak at all. Victoria's lead attorney, Harrison Pike, countered with the predictable defense, coincidence, not conspiracy. Overzealous employees, not corporate policy. A tragic misunderstanding blown out of proportion by opportunistic lawyers seeking publicity. But he hadn't counted on Ruby Coleman. Marcus's mother-in-law took the witness stand wearing her best church dress and the kind of dignity that comes from 73 years of refusing to bow to bullies. When Pike tried to diminish her granddaughter's trauma, Ruby's response sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Sir, you're looking at me like I'm some confused old woman who doesn't understand the legal complexities of your corporate games. But I raised 5 children during segregation, buried a husband who died fighting for civil rights, and watched my granddaughter overcome more obstacles in 14 years than you faced in your entire privileged life. That child's hair wasn't just hair, it was her heritage, her identity, her crown. And when your clients cut it, they weren't following policy. They were committing an act of violence that echoes through generations. The courtroom fell silent. Pike, a man who'd bulldozed through countless witnesses, found himself speechless in the face of Ruby's quiet fury. But the moment that shattered Victoria's defense came when Dr. Sarah Mitchell took the stand as an expert witness. Despite Columbia University's attempts to silence her, Sarah had documented every detail of the conspiracy in her private research, creating an unassailable academic record of systematic discrimination. Ladies and gentlemen, Sarah testified, pulling up charts and data that painted a damning picture, this wasn't random racism. This was psychological warfare conducted with military precision. Each victim was selected based on specific criteria: vulnerability, minority status, and likelihood to remain silent. The perpetrators studied their targets like predators studying prey, calculating exactly how much trauma they could inflict while maintaining plausible deniability. She clicked to the next slide, revealing banking records that Harrison Pike had assured Victoria no longer existed. And the payments from Pinnacle Airlines to the Professional Standards Alliance weren't consulting fees, they were bounties. Literally paying employees to traumatize passengers based on their race, religion, disability status, and sexual orientation. Victoria felt her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. The bank records Sarah was presenting were supposed to have been destroyed. The digital trail was supposed to have been scrubbed clean. Someone had betrayed her, someone with access to files that only her inner circle should have seen. That's when FBI agent Maria Santos took the stand and revealed the twist that no one, not even Marcus Coleman, had seen coming. Your Honor, 6 months ago we received a call from someone inside Pinnacle Airlines. A conscience-stricken employee who'd been documenting the conspiracy from the beginning, creating an insurance policy in case they needed to expose their employers. Agent Santos looked directly at Victoria Cross. That employee was Patricia Wells. The courtroom erupted. Patricia Wells, the senior flight attendant who'd led the Professional Standards Alliance, who'd orchestrated dozens of discriminatory attacks, who'd been Victoria's perfect puppet, had been an FBI informant the entire time. Victoria's face went ashen as Agent Santos continued. Ms. Wells came to us after the attack on Nia Coleman. She said watching a child being traumatized for corporate profit was a line she couldn't cross. She's been recording conversations, copying financial documents, and providing evidence of the conspiracy for federal prosecutors for months. The courtroom doors opened, and Patricia Wells walked in flanked by federal marshals. The woman who terrorized innocent passengers now looked small and frightened, but determined to finally tell the truth. I want to testify, Patricia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I want to tell everyone what Victoria Cross paid us to do to innocent people. What she paid us to do to children. Harrison Pike was frantically whispering to Victoria, but she wasn't listening. Her empire was collapsing in real time, broadcast live on every major network. Stock prices were plummeting. Board members were calling for her resignation. Federal agents were probably already at her penthouse with arrest warrants. But the moment that broke Victoria Cross completely came when Nia Coleman took the witness stand. The 14-year-old girl who'd been targeted for destruction walked slowly to the front of the courtroom, her head still wrapped in one of Ruby's colorful scarves. She'd requested a sign language interpreter, and as she began to speak, her hands moved with the grace and power of someone far beyond her years. My name is Nia Coleman, she signed, her words being spoken aloud by the interpreter. I am deaf. I am black. I am 14 years old. And 6 weeks ago, strangers decided that those 3 facts made me a target for their hatred. She looked directly at Victoria Cross, her young face carrying the strength of generations. You thought I would be easy to break because I'm different. You thought my family would be easy to silence because we were alone. You thought wrong. Nia's hands moved faster, her message gaining power with every gesture. I want you to see what you failed to destroy. My hair is growing back, stronger than before. My voice is louder than ever. My family is united in a way that your hate could never tear apart. And because of what you did to me, 46 other people found the courage to tell their stories. She stood up, removing Ruby's scarf for the first time in public since the attack. Her head was covered with new growth, tiny locks beginning to curl toward the light like flowers reaching for the sun. This is my crown, she signed, running her fingers over her short hair. You cut it, but you couldn't kill it. Just like you tried to cut down our dignity, our justice, our hope, but you couldn't kill those either. The courtroom was dead silent except for the sound of reporters frantically typing and Victoria Cross's quiet sobs. I forgive you, Nia continued, her signs gentle now. Not because you deserve it, but because carrying your hate would make me like you. And I refuse to become someone who hurts others to feel powerful. She looked around the courtroom at the other victims, at her family, at Daniel whose eyes were shining with love and pride. You wanted to make me disappear. Instead, you made me visible to the whole world. You wanted to make me silent. Instead, you gave me a voice that reaches millions. You wanted to teach me that I don't belong. Instead, you taught me that I belong exactly where I choose to stand." Nia sat back down, and the courtroom remained silent for a full minute, a minute of respect for a child who just delivered the most powerful closing argument any of them had ever heard. 3 hours later, Judge Washington delivered a verdict that would reshape the aviation industry forever: $2.8 billion in damages, criminal referrals for Victoria Cross and 17 co-conspirators, and immediate federal oversight of both airlines' hiring and training practices. But more importantly, as news of the verdict spread across social media and news networks, something fundamental shifted in the national conversation about discrimination, corporate accountability, and the power of ordinary people to demand extraordinary justice. Outside the courthouse, as camera crews jostled for position and reporters shouted questions, Nia Coleman stood with her family and Daniel, watching the world finally listen to what she'd been trying to say all along. Sometimes the girl who cannot hear is indeed the one who makes everyone listen. Victoria Cross was led away in handcuffs, her empire in ruins, her legacy forever tied to the child she'd tried to destroy. And in the midst of their triumph, Marcus Coleman looked at his daughter, his brilliant, resilient, unbreakable daughter, and realized that she'd never needed him to protect her. She'd been strong enough to protect herself all along. Justice served. Can you feel that? The moment when truth finally wins, when the powerful fall, and when a 14-year-old girl shows the world what real strength looks like. This is why I tell these stories, because sometimes fiction reminds us what's possible in real life. If this victory feels as sweet to you as it does to me, share this story with someone who needs to remember that voices matter, that courage is contagious, and that even the quietest among us can change the world. But we're not done yet. There's one more chapter in Nia's incredible journey. 1 year later. The auditorium at Columbia University buzzed with anticipation as 1,400 people gathered for the inaugural Nia Coleman Symposium on Aviation Justice and Accessibility. In the front row sat Ruby Coleman, now 74 and officially the Internet's favorite grandmother, live-tweeting the event to her 2.3 million followers who'd fallen in love with her wisdom and fierce advocacy for her granddaughter. Beside her, Marcus Coleman adjusted his tie nervously. His consulting firm had not only survived the aftermath of the trial, it had thrived beyond his wildest dreams. Companies across every industry now sought his expertise in building truly inclusive policies, and his client list had expanded to include Fortune 500 companies, government agencies, and international corporations. But today wasn't about business success. Today was about watching his daughter change the world. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, now the director of Columbia's new Center for Corporate Accountability, stepped to the podium to introduce the keynote speaker. Her voice carried across the packed auditorium as she began. Ladies and gentlemen, 1 year ago, a 14-year-old girl sat in an airport chair while someone tried to cut away her dignity along with her hair. Today, that same young woman has transformed not just the aviation industry, but our entire national conversation about corporate responsibility, victim advocacy, and the power of refusing to stay silent. The audience erupted in applause as Nia Coleman walked onto the stage. Now 15, she moved with the quiet confidence of someone who'd faced the worst the world could offer and emerged stronger. Her locks had grown back fuller and more beautiful than ever, cascading past her shoulders like a living crown that caught the stage lights and seemed to glow with its own inner fire. She wore a simple blue dress that Ruby had made for her, and around her neck hung a gold pendant, a gift from Daniel that was engraved with the ASL sign for strength. But it was her eyes that held the audience's attention, eyes that had seen darkness but chose to focus on light, eyes that had witnessed injustice but refused to surrender to cynicism. "Hello," Nia signed as she approached the microphone, her interpreter Dr. Rebecca Chen standing beside her. "My name is Nia Coleman. I am 15 years old. I am deaf. I am black. And 1 year ago, I learned that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you can become the catalyst for the best thing you'll ever do." The audience fell silent, captivated by the young woman's presence. When Ethan Shaw cut my hair in that airport, he thought he was teaching me a lesson about knowing my place. Instead, he taught me something far more valuable, that my place is anywhere I choose to stand, and my voice is whatever I choose it to be. Nia paused, looking out at the sea of faces, students, professors, activists, corporate executives, and dozens of the victims who joined her lawsuit and were now scattered throughout the audience like family. The past year has brought changes I never could have imagined. The Coleman Aviation Justice Act passed Congress and was signed into law, creating federal protections for airline passengers and mandatory bias training for all aviation employees. Both Atlantic Airways and Pinnacle Airlines were completely restructured under federal oversight, with new leadership committed to true equality and inclusion. She gestured to the audience, where several of her fellow plaintiffs sat beaming with pride. Maria Gonzalez, whose family was removed from first class for suspicious behavior, is now studying law at Harvard with a full scholarship funded by our settlement. Mr. Singh, who was forced to remove his turban, has become an advocate for religious freedom in transportation and advises airlines across the country on respectful security practices. Sarah Williams, who was denied access to the business class bathroom, now works with transgender advocacy groups to ensure equal treatment for all travelers. The applause was thunderous, but Nia waited patiently for it to subside before continuing. But perhaps the most important change has been personal. I used to think that being different made me vulnerable. I thought that being deaf in a hearing world, being black in spaces that weren't designed for me, being young in conversations dominated by adults, I thought all of these things made me weak. She smiled, and the warmth of that smile seemed to reach every corner of the auditorium. I was wrong. Being different didn't make me vulnerable, it made me necessary. The world didn't need another voice that sounded like everyone else's. It needed my voice, exactly as it was. It needed the perspective that comes from navigating the world differently, from overcoming obstacles that others never face, from refusing to be silenced when silence would have been easier. In the audience, Daniel Mitchell Rivera watched the woman he loved with a pride so fierce it made his chest ache. Now 27 and running his own civil rights law firm, he'd represented over 100 discrimination cases in the past year, inspired by Nia's example to never again let powerful people intimidate him into abandoning vulnerable clients. Their relationship had deepened into something beautiful and enduring, built on shared purpose, mutual respect, and a love that had been forged in the crucible of fighting for justice together. Today, I want to talk about the power of transformed pain, Nia continued, her signs fluid and graceful. Victoria Cross thought that hurting me would break me. Instead, it broke open something inside me that I didn't even know existed, a capacity for courage that was always there, waiting for the right moment to emerge. She looked directly into the camera that was broadcasting the speech live to millions of viewers around the world. To every young person watching this who has ever been told they don't belong, who has ever had someone try to cut away their dignity, who has ever felt invisible in spaces where their voice should matter most, I want you to know that your differences are not weaknesses to overcome. They are superpowers waiting to be discovered. The standing ovation began in the front row with Ruby Coleman, who stood with tears streaming down her face, and rippled backward through the entire auditorium like a wave of pure emotion. Students, professors, activists, and executives all rose to their feet, applauding not just for Nia, but for every person who'd ever refused to stay silent in the face of injustice. After the speech, the Coleman family gathered in Dr. Sarah's office for a private celebration. Ruby had prepared her famous mac and cheese, Marcus had brought champagne, sparkling cider for Nia, and Daniel had surprised everyone with a cake decorated with tiny fondant locks that made Nia laugh until she cried happy tears. "I have an announcement," Marcus said, raising his glass. "The settlement money has been invested in the Nia Coleman Foundation for Aviation Justice, which will provide legal support for discrimination victims and scholarships for students pursuing careers in civil rights law. But more than that, Ruby, Daniel, and I have been talking, and we want to make this official." He turned to Daniel with a smile that was equal parts paternal affection and gentle warning. "Son, you've been part of this family since the day you stood up for my daughter when everyone else walked away. Would you like to make it legal?" Daniel's eyes went wide as Marcus pulled out a small velvet box. "I'm not proposing for you," That's your job when you're both ready. But I am giving you my blessing and my mother-in-law's ring to hold on to until the time is right." Nia gasped as Daniel took the box with shaking hands, understanding passing between them like a promise of beautiful tomorrows yet to come. "One more thing," Ruby said, pulling out her phone. "I've been keeping a secret. Remember that video of you being attacked that started this whole journey? Well, I've been documenting your healing journey too. And this morning, the video of your speech already has 12 million views and is trending worldwide with the hashtag #NiasVoice. She showed them her phone screen, where comment after comment poured in from people around the world sharing their own stories of transformation, their own refusals to stay silent, their own journeys from victimhood to victory. "My daughter is deaf too, and watching Nia taught her that she doesn't need to hide her differences, she needs to celebrate them. I was discriminated against at work last month. I was going to stay quiet, but Nia's story gave me courage to report it. We're filing a lawsuit next week." 15 years old and already changing the world. This is what hope looks like. Thank you, Nia, for showing us that the most powerful revolutions start with one person deciding they matter. As the sun set over New York City, the Coleman family sat together in comfortable silence, surrounded by the evidence of a year that had transformed not just their lives, but the lives of countless others who'd found their voices through Nia's courage. Nia touched her locks, now past her shoulders again, thick and beautiful and crowned with tiny golden beads that Ruby had woven in as symbols of strength, and thought about how far they'd all traveled from that terrible day in the airport. The girl who'd sat helplessly while a stranger tried to cut away her identity had grown into a young woman who'd learned that identity couldn't be cut, only revealed, strengthened, and shared with a world that desperately needed her unique light. Outside the window, the lights of the city sparkled like stars, and somewhere in those lights were millions of people who'd heard her story and decided to tell their own. People who'd learned that being different wasn't a burden to bear, but a gift to celebrate. People who discovered that sometimes the most important voices belong to those the world tries hardest to silence. And in a small apartment in Manhattan, surrounded by the people who loved her most, Nia Coleman smiled and signed to herself the words that had become her motto: "My crown grows from within, and no one can take that away from me." The girl who'd lost her voice had found it again, not just for herself, but for everyone who'd ever been told they didn't matter. And in finding her voice, she'd learned the most important lesson of all. Sometimes the most powerful sound in the world is the courage to speak your truth, no matter who tries to silence you. Some crowns, once cut, grow back as weapons. But the best crowns, the ones that matter most, grow back as bridges, connecting hearts and healing the world one story at a time. And Nia Coleman's story was just beginning. And that's how a 14-year-old girl who was told she didn't belong ended up showing the entire world exactly where she belonged, at the center of a movement that changed everything. If Nia's journey touched your heart the way it touched mine, please share this story with everyone you know. Because in a world that often tries to silence the voices that matter most, sometimes the most radical act is simply refusing to stay quiet. What did you think of Nia's incredible transformation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I love hearing how these stories impact your lives. And remember, if you enjoyed this story, there are so many more like it on this channel. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss a story that might change your perspective, inspire your courage, or simply remind you that even in the darkest moments, hope and love and justice can triumph. Until next time, keep listening to the voices that the world needs to hear most. They're all around us, waiting for someone brave enough to help them tell their stories. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice matters too.